I don't want to offend anyone that's done an MBA. I see the value in MBA.
I did an MBA, right? So,
as the child of immigrants myself and an immigrant, I have experienced firsthand that the financial system doesn't work for us. 20% is being sent home. Fine. That means there's 80% of the wallet that's not being catered for. And in the UK, based on World Bank data, that means that 118 billion pounds of purchasing power is not being catered for. VCs were like, but do immigrants have money? And I was like, oh, sweetheart, bless your heart. You have no idea, do you?
Gosh.
And now for me to be like, okay, well, I can't stop thinking about this. There's a really big problem here. There's an underserved community that has money that's not being served. Why won't anyone build for them?
Yeah.
And so I took the leap.
Today I'm joined by Nina Mohanty, the founder and the CEO of Bloom Money, a financial platform helping immigrants to build resilience in a safe and ethical manner. Nina shared with us her journey growing up in Silicon Valley, then coming over to the UK and working for some of the best fintechs the UK has to offer, from the likes of Starling, Bud, Klarna, and Mastercard. Then how she took those experiences and used them to create her own fintech startup. This is a really timely episode given what's happening at the time of recording, with widespread societal unrest, riots, and a lot of violence targeting immigrants in particular, and how Bloom proves that immigrants are a core part of our society here in the UK, and Britain just wouldn't be the same without them. As always, I'm your host, Areeb Siddiqui, and this is Muslim Money Talk. Before we begin, we actually noticed only about 10% of you are subscribed to the podcast. So if you like what you're listening to and you want to hear more from us and see more things Muslim and money related, then please consider subscribing and, of course, leaving this episode a like and share it with your friends, leave us a comment or a review, because it really, really does help us out and help more people to find us. Thank you. Now back to the show. So, I usually start this off by asking, is this what you wanted to do when you were a kid, right? But yeah. I think it's weird, like when you're in fintech entrepreneurship, when we were kids, this kind of thing never really existed.
Well, it's a tough one because I grew up in the Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And so by nature, well, people kind of, first of all, forget that people live in the Silicon Valley and don't just... The internet, the apps, the infrastructure, tech infrastructure that you use doesn't just appear. Someone has to build it. And so there are engineers, many living in the Silicon Valley. My parents were immigrants to the US, and they came to do their engineering degrees separately in computer science. And then it was in the late 80s, and they all kind of flocked. The word got around. They were both in Texas at different schools. They hadn't met each other yet. But clearly the word had got out that Silicon Valley is the place to be. They're looking for computer scientists. Go. And so everyone kind of flocked there. And my parents ended up meeting at a tech company. And I grew up there. And my father has this entrepreneurial bug in him, as many immigrants do.
Oh, really? Okay.
So he's had many startups, some that have done better than others, and he's now in the cybersecurity space. He's over 60 and he's working on a new thing, right? He's working on something new.
Wow.
And it's just interesting because I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. Not even like...
Even growing up, seeing your dad doing all these things?
Not even like, oh, I might open a coffee shop one day. I mean, we all dream of opening up like a coffee shop and a bookstore.
With a little bookshop.
That loses $20,000 every month and whatever, being independently wealthy. But I never planned on being an entrepreneur, never dreamed it. When I was a child, I wanted to be a ballerina and an astronaut.
Okay, pretty standard.
Pretty standard.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of STEM, a little bit of art, which is very me. And then because I grew up in this multicultural household, so my father's Indian, my mother's Taiwanese, my first language is Mandarin. I started teaching myself French when I was 10 years old. Unfortunately, I very shamefully am an ABD in that I don't speak Hindi. I don't speak Odia. My father's from Odisha in India. And I can understand enough like Hindi / Urdu from various Bollywood movies, but I'm pretty shameful in that regard. But I spoke enough languages and grew up in this household where I would see these cultures clashing. And people assume like, oh, we're all Asian, so like we must be the same. Even between India, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Bangladesh, there's so
let
many
alone Southeast Asia and then Far East.
Exactly. And so I ended up thinking that I would go into diplomacy.
Okay. Head for languages.
Head for languages, keeping the peace in my own household between my parents. And so I studied to ultimately, with the end goal, to end up in the Foreign Service, which is kind of what I ended up doing.
So you did international relations at Davis, right?
Davis.
Nice.
And then I did a full year at Sciences Po in Paris and studied military sciences.
Whoa, okay.
So my specialty, my, what do you call it? Like expertise or thesis was really around counterterrorism.
Okay.
I started learning Arabic when I was at uni. And so I was very on track to ultimately end up in the intelligence community, but somehow landed in tech, in fintech specifically.
So how did that happen? Because you worked for the US Embassy straight out of uni, right?
I did. So that's what brought me to London. Oh. I figured that it would be good to get some international experience. I had lived in Paris for a year. I loved Europe, and I loved the intellectual curiosity, the work-life balance that we definitely lack in the US, and just so much about Europe that really spoke to me. So applied for this role at the US Embassy, got it, working in the Foreign Commercial Service. We were tasked with bringing US business interests to the rest of the world, and packed my bags and moved to London.
And your family's all still in the US?
Yes, they're all still in the US. They're all in California. And I really, really loved working in government, especially in the Obama administration. Clearly inspirational leader, they were doing so much and so proactive in terms of trade and like foreign policy, but also found it very slow, very bureaucratic. And I don't know, maybe that's where my Silicon Valley genes kind of come in. I just wanted to move a bit faster. So I did a master's degree, and during that time fell into fintech because I needed a job.
So you did, it wasn't quite an MBA, right?
No, it was a master's in management. It was a dual master. So I technically have 2 masters degrees. Wow. Which makes me sound so wanky. So I've got this generic master's in management. It was a 2-year degree at London School of Economics. It's now called the GMIM, Global Masters in Management. And I also did this like parallel degree with SEMS, which is this consortium, if you will, of business schools around the world. So
interesting. Okay.
It started out in Europe and has now expanded beyond. So there's now one in Egypt, there's now one in South Korea, in Japan, in China, and each country has one. And in order to do this degree, you have to be fluent in 3 languages.
Wow.
You have to do an internship in the country, not of your.
So what are your 3 languages? English, French, and Mandarin.
Yes.
Wow.
I can get by with some Spanish, and then I started learning German when I lived in Vienna.
Okay.
My Arabic is very poor. I can basically ask for food in most languages.
It's better than mine. Right? So.
But yeah, so it was a really interesting experience because I don't want to offend anyone that's done an MBA. I see the value in MBA.
I did an MBA, right? So
I think a lot of the MBA value comes from the network.
Yeah, absolutely. The brand and the network are the 2 main things. I would never do an MBA just for what you can learn there. Right.
And so for me, I am very, very swotty, and I really wanted to learn. And I really wanted to get really deep into the economics of things. So great place to go and study that at London School of Economics. And then my second school was the Vienna School of Economics. So for someone who actually used to hate economics, I very much doubled down on that. And then theory and business management theory. So we did the same Harvard business case studies and everything that you may have done, but it was very, the motto of the London School of Economics is rerum cognoscere causa,
Good memory.
which I'm probably butchered it because it's Latin, but it means to know the causes of things.
Okay.
And so everything, we used to joke that there's never a straightforward answer at the LSE. The answer is always, it depends. And it's always digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it was never like, okay, here's a template and you should always do a SWOT analysis or you should always do Porter's 5 forces or whatever. But it was actually like, is there an underlying thing that we need to actually examine and dig deeper and think about management theory, which sounds so nerdy, but that's why I loved it so much.
Amazing.
There you go.
Yeah, I think so you kind of did that because you wanted to sort of reinvent yourself. You got tired of what you were doing at the embassy. It wasn't moving as fast, so you thought, let me go back to school.
I was
and
literally
figure things out.
told, like, no, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here. It's not controversial. I was literally told when I worked at the embassy by my boss that I had a bad personality. Like,
Why?
it wasn't a good fit. And she basically said, your personality is too loud.
Too loud?
Too loud. Like, you're too much. And she basically was like, you're too sunny. You're too...
An American told you that?
An American at the U.S. embassy told me that I did not have
Okay.
good personality for working in civil service.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
You would think that they would want more people joining the civil service, but there you go. And it's fine. It was actually very shocking for me as a young woman, you know, coming out of uni. But since then, I have learned that there are personalities that aren't always a good fit. So I probably would not do very well in an investment bank. I probably wouldn't do very well in a retail bank, if I'm being completely honest. So it just happened that I probably have a good fit personality for the tech world.
Wow.
Go figure.
So then you found yourself making your first foray into fintech.
Yes,
So you got a job at Mastercard.
I did.
Okay.
I did. It was actually really fun because I always joke with people, I don't present well on paper.
Why? What do you mean?
I'm just terrible with resumes. I think maybe it's this like Asian immigrant upbringing, especially on my East Asian side. We're always taught to be very modest and very humble, and you don't brag about anything, which is the opposite of what a CV is. You're supposed to brag about how great you are.
Yeah.
And so I'm really bad at taking responsibility for work that I've done.
Okay.
So I've actually had to have friends step in before and like rewrite my resume because it's so sad otherwise. But once I get into the door, I always joke, if I get an interview, I usually get the job, which is true. And what I loved about this interview with Mastercard was they basically said, come in and present to us. At the time, they were building out MasterPass, RIP to that product. And it was basically a wallet, right? A digital wallet. And they said, present to us an app in which you integrate the MasterPass
Oh, that's really
API.
cool.
And so
And this was before, I guess Monzo was just coming up.
they were literally just starting. Monzo was still Mondo. at the time.
Mondo. Okay,
Yeah.
before the law.
They hadn't even launched the prepaid card yet.
Wow.
And so I mocked up this. I'm a big lover of the arts. I'm going to the theater tonight, right? Like I love going to
What
the
are you
theater.
saying?
I'm actually saying Les Mis.
Okay.
with
It's
a-
good. I've seen it.
I've
Yeah.
never seen it.
Oh, wow.
I've read it in French, but
Okay,
I've never
big flex.
seen it. And so because I love theater so much, I integrated the MasterPass API into an app. So it's really interesting because now some of the theaters actually have it where you can order for your interval drink or snacks or whatever.
Oh, cool. Through
And
that
then you
app.
would just pay through your MasterPass
Right.
wallet, and then it would either be laid out for you or brought to you or whatever. And what's interesting is I think the MasterPass wallet lives on in the States, and they've
Really?
integrated that into stadiums.
Is it almost akin to like an Apple Pay or a Google Pay?
They were very much trying to compete in that way. I don't think directly with like the hardware folks, but really trying to make it easier for you to put all of your credentials, any MasterCard credentials, in one wallet.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like an open banking for MasterCard.
Pretty much, yeah. And actually, it might have been ahead of its time.
It
actually.
sounds like it was.
Because
so
they're doing
cool.
some really cool stuff now with like card tokenization and like refreshing your credentials. My ex-boyfriend, I met him at MasterCard, and he worked on that product of actually refreshing your token. So even if you say are issued a new Mastercard, it would update on all of your like kind of card on files and sort of thing. So it was a bit before its time, but that was what I mocked up, and then miraculously got the job and joined at a time when Monzo was Mondo. Revolut had just raised their seed round.
Gosh.
Anne at Starling had gone back to the drawing board, clearly, after the fallout.
Decimating the team.
Yeah. And so it was a really exciting time to be there.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky in that I'm a very curious person, and kind of the opposite of working at the embassy. I was encouraged to be curious. So there's several people, Seb Slatter, Scott Abrams, Ash, Brandon, my goodness, I'm going way back. And they all just encouraged me to be curious. And they just said kind of go out and learn things.
Very cool. Because when I think about people who, go back and do something in management, usually the exact route they go to is just into consulting, MBB or Big Four or investment banking. It's very rare I hear, but it sounds like Mastercard was this amazing breeding ground for innovation.
Fantastic. I actually if I were to go back into corporate life, I'd probably go to Mastercard.
Okay.
Wow. This is not sponsored by Mastercard, by the way. It just
if you'd like to,
Mastercard, get in touch. But no, truly, like Mastercard, it was a really nice balance of. It's relatively small in terms of employee size around the world. It's everywhere. It's a global business, and they're really good about moving you around if you want a new opportunity, or if you want to learn about something. I mean, I remember I presented. I was in my 20s, early 20s. I presented to the entire UK and I organization a presentation I put together on blockchain.
Wow.
And like, what is cryptocurrency? And I remember my hands shaking as I was presenting, because like you have the president of UK and I like sat there listening to, this analyst associate type person.
That's incredible access for
so it was really good. And I really rate my experience there. And if I ever were to return to corporate life, I would probably seek out Mastercard.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So Mastercard, and then you found yourself into open banking, right?
Starling first.
Starling? Were you at Starling?
Yes.
Oh, man. Okay.
So I was at Starling the summer of 2017.
So you were you must have been under 30 employees or?
No. By then it was like 100. So I was probably employee 130 something.
Okay.
It had grown very, very quickly.
Wow.
But I remember the day that we launched the debit card.
Oh my God.
I remember the day that GPS, which is now called Thread, went down, and Revolut, Monzo, and Starling were all issuing, or payment processing was on GPS before all three brought them in-house. And so I remember the panic of that morning when everyone was trying to go, when we all went to the office still, people were trying to buy their Pret or their coffee first thing in the morning, and no one's Monzo, Starling, or Revolut card was working.
How many customers did you guys have back then?
My gosh, probably a few thousand.
A few thousand,
I'd have to ask. Our CMO was the head of growth then. Our CMO at Bloom was the head of growth at Starling, and I largely credit her for hunting down the first million customers at Starling. But it was a baptism by fire. I learned so much there, from going from Mastercard and the Rails scheme side to issuer side, and what it takes to build a consumer brand. And it was very interesting, because when the payment processor went down, and that affected everyone universally, well, anyone that was using GPS at the time, I remember like not panic, but there was a lot of anxiety of people haven't been able to pay for things with their card. And at that moment in time, you could feel like this is make or break, which now, as a startup founder myself, you look back and laugh, because what could have killed you a year ago is not what's going to kill you in 5 years' time, right? But the way that the comms were handled and the way that the customer support team was briefed around that, like, really taught me a lot about building trust when you're building something B2C. Of course, definitely important B2B as well, but it was very interesting to be there and watch it unfold at Starling.
We faced It's so interesting you say that, because in Islamic finance, fintech, Islamic finance in general, when we ask people what is the one factor they consider when they're looking at a new Islamic finance, or something that a firm that can help them to grow their wealth in a way that aligns with their beliefs, the one barrier which has always prevented people from looking into new solutions is always trust. There's a lot of, unfortunately, bad will that's been built up by previous players who took advantage, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, and that's this uphill battle that we're always trying to fight. So different ways of building trust is so interesting to me in the fintech space. So seeing what Starling did and how it's effectively a household name now, at least in the southeast and most of the country,
definitely,
and even different parts of the world. Like I was in Malaysia, people are talking about Starling Engine over there now.
Oh wow!
Different banks.
I'll have to go tell Sam and Miriam, who are now CXOs of Starling Engine. That's really cool.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff over there.
Good to hear.
So you were at Starling, and then what was the highlight? But
sorry. Well, Starling, the highlight was
being there for the debit card launch, I guess.
Yeah, that was definitely very, very cool.
But
I mean, how many people can say that they've launched a fully licensed and regulated bank debit card?
Successfully launched it, isn't
yes.
it? Yeah.
Well, yes, indeed. So that was definitely a highlight. And honestly, at that time, I don't know. I'm very blessed, clearly, because I just have amazing people that are constantly introduced into my life, often in professional settings. And I'm still in touch on a day-to-day basis with folks that I worked with at Starling.
Wow. So you have a lot of mentors from that part of your life.
A lot of mentors. I mean, I sometimes email Anne.
Wow. Okay.
And I get coffee with Anne. And I'm very, very blessed in that way. But the fact that Aida, who was head of growth at Starling and then went on to funding options and other stuff, has now joined us as our CMO is like just a testament to like these amazing people that I've had in my life that I've kind of collected and carried with me. Harriet, who was head of PR at Starling, she is now freelance, but she did the Make Money Equal report that is still cited about how women are spoken to about money differently than men.
Do you think that's one of your superpowers? Because I think a lot of people struggle with building those meaningful connections as they move throughout their careers. But you seem very good at keeping those like very strong connections throughout your career.
You know, it's funny. Asha, our ops manager, once asked me, because we jumped on a call for like a vendor or something, and we had never worked with them before, but I met them years ago when I was at a different job. I was at Bud probably when I first met them. And I just happened to remember a lot about their life. And we were chatting and having a good laugh and like good crack. And afterwards she asked me, how do you remember so much about people? And I couldn't actually give her an answer. It's just, I think I find just a genuine curiosity in people. And if they humor my curiosity, then I take that on board, and then that becomes like hopefully a lovely relationship. So perhaps that is my story.
I think so. You really shouldn't take it for granted, because as someone who really struggles to remember names and faces, it's very impressive to me.
Well, and I think my superpower is I make an effort, right? So, you know, we text each other and I'm like, hey, do you want to catch up?
Yeah.
And sometimes you text me, or I will seek out people and just catch up with them. And I think there is sadly this like lack of curiosity about other people and how they're doing and what's happening in their lives these days.
Yeah, I guess it's people treat relationships very transactionally.
I've just never been that type of person.
Yeah.
And if I ever become that way, like pull me aside and have a stern word with me, please, because that's never going to be me.
So Starling was amazing, but you said
short-lived.
Okay.
So I was meant to stay on at Starling Bank and then was approached by the early team at Bud, which is an open banking platform. And Jamie Campbell convinced me to jump ship and said, open banking is going to change everything. It's going to change retail banking as we know it. And 6 years later, we're getting there slowly, aren't we?
I mean, it was transformational for us at Kestrl because, as you know, we tried to go down the digital banking route. We saw the heavy costs involved versus our fundraising at the time, as well as what customers were telling us. And open banking was almost this incredible door out. There's this way out where we were like, okay, we can have people still plug in their existing bank accounts and we can help them to make their money more Sharia compliant in that way. So for us, it was a huge break. It's just a shame, as you say, it hasn't taken off in the way that people envisaged 6 years ago?
I think it has panned out, but at a slower pace than expected, right? Like, to get really nerdy, I'm still waiting for variable reoccurring payments to be widely accessible, at least across the CMA9, right? And we're just not there yet. But now the AIS part, account information services.
Yeah.
Everyone refers to it as account aggregation, but it's not. It's actually an AISP.
AISP. That's right.
PISP.
Yeah.
So account initiation or information? Account initiation.
I think it's account information service provision.
And then it's payment initiation.
Payment initiation.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So AISP allows us to pull in the data and read it.
Correct.
And PISP allows us to actually move the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, wow. That's like,
that's super nutty. I think only like 0.5% of our listeners will actually care about that.
Way back there. But there is something really exciting about that. And so this idea of like data sovereignty for the customer. I own my data. And actually, it was so perplexing to me when Jamie would explain it to me that up until that point, the assumption had always been that the bank owns your data. It was just very perplexing to me. And it was a no-brainer to be like, well, of course the customer should own their own data and decide where they want it to be and who they want to share it with and what they want to do with it. And so I jumped, joined as employee 12, and we were in a tiny, tiny studio. I think it must have been like a converted studio into an office off of Brick Lane, on Brick Lane, actually.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember I was like the first woman in that office. And so I had to like remind the guys, like, let's wash our hands after we use the toilet.
Yeah, that's always difficult. Shout out to Anise from our team. She was the first girl in our office. Because when we saw at Kestrl in Malaysia, in the Malaysian office, the guys were just working from a house. Dying's father-in-law was kind enough to just give it to us rent-free. And then we had Anise, who was, I think, straight out of uni. She was like our first female full-time hire who was going to be in the office. And her parents, like, bless them, they rocked up at the house to drop her off, and they immediately were like, what is this place? There's just like 10 guys in there just in t-shirts and shorts, questionable hygiene levels. So that's what really pushed us to be like, okay, we need a proper kind of office.
In a previous life, I was a fraternity mom, so that
clearly
prepared me for this. But I will be honest, I learned so much and grew so much as a person in that short period of time and became very, very bullish on open banking. And my job was like partnerships. So my job was to know everyone in fintech. And so what a treat. Your job is to go to networking events and meet people and find connections so that we can work together.
Leveraging that superpower of yours.
Yeah, so it worked out really, really well. And to this day, I'm very bullish on open banking.
Thank you for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in checking out what we do at Kestrl, the Muslim Money app. Kestrl is a service that helps Muslims who want to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their belief or user experience or price. I founded Kestrl because of how fed up I was at how poor Islamic financial services were in this country. Often people didn't use them because of how bad the user experience or customer service, and indeed how high on price they were. So Kestrl was the answer to that. If you download the Kestrl app today, it can help you by creating a budgeting plan. Plug in whatever bank account you have and it will create an auto budget just for you. You can then tell us what goals you're saving for and we'll save towards them automatically into pots, and then crucially link you towards Sharia compliant investment and savings products as well. So download Kestrl today and try it out for yourself. Now back to the podcast. Same.
Yeah.
No, I think once it gets where it's going to go, and I think the UK is the best place for it because we've seen it just have a lot of false starts in other parts of the world where, in regions in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East, there are big banks who are sort of monopolizing and stopping the conversation dead just because they don't see the benefit to themselves.
Well, and that's what we had the same thing here, didn't we? So I'm not surprised. I mean, with 1033 in the US, like the banks are digging their heels in, and there's so many more of them. So there needs to be almost like an equivalent of the CMA9 where it's like, here are the largest banks and they must comply and then everyone else will get on board. But yeah, if you've had access to customer data for decades, and even if you're not even doing anything with that data, let's be very honest, you're not providing additional insight to your customer, you just kind of think it's mine and I don't want to give it to you.
Yeah.
So I can see why, but I hate to break it to you, all of you banks, you're going to just have to fall in line because it's coming for you regardless whether or not you want it to.
Absolutely. So you're still bullish on open banking, but then you left Bud to do something very different.
Very different. Yes.
Klarna. Buy now, pay later powerhouse.
I know. It's so fun. Do you know Eunice Zaman?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So she hates buy now, pay later. And we did a whole podcast actually for her.
Oh, did you?
Get Money Right. Yeah. About it.
No way.
And she really wanted my perspective of buy now, pay later as someone who's been there, done it, built the products. That was, again, a very serendipitous thing. Got tapped on the shoulder by the chief commercial officer, then Michael Rouse, who very kindly said, we've heard great things. Come join us. Help us win the US.
So you didn't apply to a job since Mastercard? People just tapped you on the shoulder for different roles?
Correct.
That's very cool.
Actually, most of these opportunities presented themselves through Twitter.
Really?
So, RIP Twitter, not to dead name it, but X, whatever you want to call it. But
yeah.
What I loved about fintech Twitter was it was such an open, conversational place, and people would sign into your DMs and be like, hey, love your tweet about like AISPs or whatever. And apparently they had been watching me for some time at Klarna and thought, she's interesting. Let's bring her on board. So I did. Cool. I moved out to California, to LA. Hated it there.
You were based in LA at the time?
Yeah, I'm a Northern California gal. I'm from the Silicon Valley. We have that same north-south divide you find in many different countries or states. And living in LA was weird, but very exciting because I got to build out my commercial chops and learn how to sell. And it's funny because people think that I'm a good salesperson. I actually would say I'm not. I'm just persistent. But that might be the key thing to being a good salesperson, is just like consistency and persistence, perhaps. But I really missed products. So moved back in 2020. And that's when we probably crossed paths for the first time.
Yes, I think so. So I was fresh out of business school.
Yeah.
Was doing Kestrl in my weekends and evenings whilst consulting at PwC.
Yeah.
And that's when we crossed paths. So we were at a launch party for Bab Bank. I don't know if you remember them. In level 39.
Oh my gosh, yes, that's right.
I still have that t-shirt. I wear it to the gym all the time. It's a good t-shirt. It's lasted.
I do have a section of my wardrobe which is like dead fintech t-shirt.
Oh no.
It's really, really sad. But I also have like a drawer of like fintech socks and like other things. Actually, all of my t-shirts are basically I was wearing this morning a SoFi.
Oh, really?
American fintech, yeah.
Okay.
Hoodie. And so I probably need to branch out and get
just
some
collecting them all
clothes.
like Infinity Stones. You have a Kestrl t-shirt as well.
I do. Thank you very much. Thank you. I demanded it from our ops manager when we were exhibiting at
Muslim Tech Fest. That's right.
Exactly.
Muslim Tech Fest. Shout out to our friend Zahid again for setting that up. Okay, cool. So what is your take on buy now, pay later? Because I might have my qualms about it as well.
Yeah.
I think it can be quite damaging. I think it's weird where if you're ordering Uber Eats or Deliveroo and it's saying, hey, do you want to buy now, pay later there?
I have a very love-hate relationship with it. So cons, right now we're in this like hyper-capitalist stage of the world where unfortunately buy now, pay later is complicit in helping people buy things they don't need and perpetuating this I need it now instant gratification culture, this disposable fashion culture, which I take issue with. I also think it's really dangerous if you are needing to use buy now, pay later to buy food, if you are needing it to get petrol, which is something that Klarna and a few others have partnerships with in the States. And from a strictly like default perspective, surely like there's a lot of risk that needs to be understood there. What I will say about buy now, pay later though is I'm not shy about the fact that I racked up a lot of credit card debt when I was in uni, $10,000 worth of credit card debt, which I ultimately paid off. But buy now, pay later, if you were to just stick with one, let's say Klarna, you will eventually be cut off, right? Klarna can only suffer so many losses, and they're not going to keep increasing your limit for you to spend if you're not paying them back because you've already defaulted, you're non-performing on your loan, right?
Sure.
And that limit might be £1,000. It might be £500, depending on what your internal Klarna score is. I think what's really dangerous is we know for a fact that credit card companies will go ahead and increase your limit. You may be just paying the minimum every month and rotating a balance, but they will go ahead and increase your limit. And nowadays they do you the courtesy of asking, would you like to opt in for an increased limit? But when you're young and maybe don't really understand or are making poor financial decisions, you just say yes.
Yeah.
Or in my case, they were just extended without my permission or explicit consent to increase my limit. So then I would spend more. And it's interesting because my mother actually taught me, do not rotate a balance, pay everything in full. This is how credit cards work. And it's useful for you to build your credit score, but don't ever rotate a balance. And I knew that she had hammered into my head. But of course, life gets the better of you. And all of a sudden I had like full dining sets living in a college dorm room. Why did I need that? I didn't. So I think if I had Klarna, they would have cut me off. And it wouldn't have compounded either. So that's the other thing. It is interest free. Because the merchant is the one paying the merchant discount rate, you're not paying interest. So that is an interesting Sharia compliance approach, depending on who.
Is Klarna Sharia certified? That's so interesting.
I don't think they are.
In Islam, interest or riba, as we call it in Arabic, is a really deadly sin. Like
Yes.
it is up there.
You serious?
Yeah, it's the only sin in the Quran, our holy book, where God actually wages war on someone who declares war on someone who consumes or engages in interest. So it's beyond, as Muslims we talk about, we don't drink alcohol, we don't eat pork, we only eat halal. This is way more important than any of those things.
Interesting.
And yet it's something that touches all of our lives, and we're trying to sort it out.
Well, especially in the Western world, which is built on debt.
Yeah.
We can I have a whole or separate. Have you ever read American Elegy?
No.
Is American Elegy? Yeah, I think that's what it's called. There's a whole chapter. I bring this up all the time with my friends because I read Islamic Finance for Dummies early days. Bloom is not Sharia certified, but we did talk a lot about this.
Yes, we did.
Once upon a time.
Yeah.
And I actually have been looking at perhaps going to the European Council for certification. Because we've spoken to many Islamic scholars about Bloom and the way that it is. But you were right. From beginning to end, it has to be halal. Which, if you think about, okay, if you're raising debt to lend out, well, you're paying interest on that debt that you've raised. So then that in itself is already...
Yeah, it's already non-compliant. So that's the thing. And what's interesting is in the UK is that I think British Muslims, more so than perhaps other Muslims in the West, care a lot about this. They're very religiously minded with everything from their food, their prayers, but also about their money.
Yeah.
And there's a huge movement about one of our previous episodes. There was a lot of controversy around it about how Islamic is Islamic finance and the Islamic banks which are out there today. Are they truly end-to-end Islamic Sharia certified when it's very hard to actually be that way, nigh on impossible when you're operating in the world's ecosystem,
in the Western world,
in the Western world, or the world in general, right? Let's talk. I mean, if you look at Malaysia, Pakistan, Saudi, they all have conventional banks as well as Islamic banks.
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
So it's very hard to escape that.
Well, and also think about does are loans from the World Bank Sharia compliant? Probably not.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. But so you were at Klarna, buy now, pay later. What motivated you? Because we can kind of see the different puzzle pieces falling into place now. But what motivated you to say, you know what, I've got one of the hottest careers in fintech right now, right? I'm blowing up, but like everyone's talking about Nina Mohanty. let me throw caution to the wind and do my own thing.
It was a number of things. I think through the pandemic, even before, I think, the pandemic bears a lot of responsibility for many people's decisions in 2020 and onwards. Even before that, I think it was correlation, not causation. There was already a shift happening in the world. And I'm someone that very much cares about purpose. I think I'm a cliche now. We as millennials care deeply that our work has impact, has purpose. That's why so many of us are having crises right now in our work. I think I started to have this very intense curiosity meeting up. So one was my experience as a fintech operator and my interest in the financial system. And then the other was this work that I'd been doing with various refugee and migration groups. And
what work was that?
So I have done many, many things. I have done everything from volunteer at the Refugee Community Kitchen, which I highly recommend if you have your Sundays free. They're a charity that prepares meals nominally for refugees, because they do it also in Calais, but in London as well, across London. But basically it's a free hot meal for anyone, whether or not you're a refugee. I taught English to new refugees. I do some advisory work with Talent Beyond Boundaries. They're an organization that brings skilled refugees out of refugee camps and then into the Western world on like special visa pathways. So I helped a bunch of nurses from a refugee camp in Lebanon get access to an e-money account so that they could be paid by the NHS.
Wow.
Because they were nurses and doctors who had a work contract with the NHS but couldn't open a bank account, right? So I've done many things in this space. And as the child of immigrants myself and an immigrant, I have experienced firsthand that the financial system doesn't work for us. And so I really just started delving really deep into it. And because I am privileged enough to be a, quote, single woman without children, my COVID experience was probably different than many other people's, where I wasn't running after my children, trying to balance, remote school and all that stuff. Didn't have a dog to walk. So I had all this time on my hands. And so I really started reading everything from Banker for the Poor by Muhammad Yunus, who might soon be leading Bangladesh, to, Bottom of the Pyramid by Esther Duflo, and I forgot her co-author's name, but the Nobel Prize winning economist, to reading about microfinance in sub-Saharan Africa, to reading about the Mission Asset Fund project in San Francisco and how they use Roscas for people to bring and pull their money together. And then I was reading a lot about remittances and then speaking to people, friends of mine that work in the remittance space. So I spoke to the late and great Catherine Wines, who was one of the co-founders of Talk Remit.
Wow.
Sorry, not Talk Remit, World Remit. I spoke to Ismail Ahmed, the founder of World Remit. I spoke to Dora at Azimo and Marta at Azimo. I spoke to Benji at Nala. I just spoke to so many people around remittances and tried to figure out why is it that we've only innovated when it comes to remittances when we talk about immigrant communities.
Yeah, that seems to be always where it goes. Okay, immigrants, they just want to send money back home.
Correct. And Western Union did a really interesting report a few years ago now, where they found that the average immigrant sends 20% of their yearly earnings home, which is a lot already, right?
Yeah.
Let's use that as a base level. If 20% is being sent home, fine. That means there's 80% of the wallet that's not being catered for. And in the UK, based on World Bank data, that means that 118 billion pounds of purchasing power is not being catered for.
So people are just storing it in cash? Or?
Well, I mean, it's purchasing power. So they're paying their rent, they're, doing whatever, buying groceries, whatever. But then what I kept finding through my conversations is people were putting money literally under the mattress. People were buying gold, right? Very popular, especially in global South cultures. I always thought it was a South Asian thing, but like my Somali friends, my Nigerian friends are also buying gold, maybe not in jewelry the way that we do in South Asian communities. There is just such a distrust of the financial system, down to conspiracy theories of, if you use your debit card too much, they'll know. Your nail tech, my nail tech who does my nails, who's Vietnamese, they're saying things like, oh, if you send me the money via bank transfer and title it gift, then they won't look at it and it won't raise suspicion or whatever, right? I'm like, okay, and the theories that come out of this and like how the system works. And there's a reason why nail salons tend to be cash only, right?
Right.
So I just became very, very stuck into this world. And I actually shipped it around and asked other folks like, hey, can I come build this with you? Or can I come to Moniz and build this with Moniz? Can I come to Starling and build this? Well, Starling wasn't clearly a good fit, but I went around and asked people like, can I build a greenfield thing under your business? Because again, I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. Very, very risk averse. I'm an immigrant child, right? So I've always been told you're a doctor or a lawyer and like, oh, begrudgingly fine, you're going to work in fintech, but at least you're paid well.
Yeah.
And now for me to be like, okay, well, I can't stop thinking about this. There's a really big problem here. There's an underserved community that has money that's not being served. Why won't anyone build for them?
Yeah.
And so I took the leap.
Gosh. So you started doing it whilst you were still working at Klarna.
Yeah, so I started researching and like doing a lot of the reading while I was still at Klarna.
Yeah.
Didn't start building anything until after, so all the IP is Bloom's. Thank you very much. But
yep, that's on record.
Yeah, just for the record. But I did very much have the time to explore it, which I think I wouldn't have had it not been the pandemic.
What is Bloom then? In your own words, what does exactly what does it do for the immigrant community?
So in its current form, Bloom is a digital savings club. It's something that we from the Global South community, this behavior, know it by any number of names. We might know it as committee.
In Pakistan, it's committee. Yeah,
committee, chit funds, kiddies, jamaya in Arabic. I remember I was in the bathroom with this Palestinian woman a few months ago, and I was telling her about Bloom, and she's like, "Oh, what is it?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a digital jamaya," and she like glitched because she's like, "Wait, what? Did you just say that word?" She did not expect me to say it in Arabic to her. Somalis will know it as Hagbad, Ayuto. It's very commonly known as Pardna in the UK because it was very popular with the Caribbean folks that came over in the Windrush generation. It's done in Mexico, known as Tanda. It's known as Consorcio in Brazil. My party trick now is you tell me what your background, your heritage is, and I'll tell you what it's called in your language. I met a woman who's Congolese, and I was like, oh, you would know it as Likalimba. And she was like, what?
That's so cool.
Why do you know what Likalimba is? But in short, it's a group pulling of funds. So 5 people get together, let's say, and we each agree to put £100 into the pot every month. We each put £100 in. There's £500. One of us gets that first pot. We go off and do whatever we want with it. The next month, we all come together. We each put £100. There's £500 in the pot. And now the next person gets it, and so on and so forth. And what is very interesting about this is, again, it exists in every global South culture. I always thought it was an Asian thing because I learned it from my family. And then I came here and learned that everybody was doing it. But what I also learned is that it does have quite a history in the UK. So I mentioned...
Beyond just immigrants or...
No. Well, actually, interestingly, it was known, quite known in working class communities as well, especially up north. I almost wonder if perhaps that coincided with the arrival of many migrants post-war. Because historically, Pardna, or Pardna scheme as people call it, came over with the Caribbean folks from Jamaica, for example, so with the Windrush generation. And because the banks actively discriminated against them, they would use this, Pardna, they call it, to buy houses, to buy cars, to to start their businesses. Similarly, when we think about a lot of the South Asians that came to the UK to work in the mills up north, this is also a behavior that people use. Bangladeshi families in Birmingham. Our CTO was the one white family on his street in Small Heath in Birmingham. And a Bangladeshi family bought his grandparents' house in cash using committee.
Wow.
Yeah. It's really interesting that actually this is a fairly historical thing in the UK and our financial system. And I've even spoken to people up in Scotland. They call it menage. Very popular with working class folks.
That's so cool. From an anthropological perspective, it seems to be how human beings have been doing this almost independently.
Yeah.
Like this idea just came about on its own.
How is it possible that people in Peru are doing something that people in Pakistan are also doing?
Yeah.
Like it's a natural way of coming together with your community. And the idea is based completely around community and trust. And you don't have to go to a bank. People are underwriting each other, right? And so in a way, there is underwriting still happening.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, if you and I are putting in £100 into this pot.
Yeah.
And then we're neighbors, we live in the same community. I then take this money and I run.
Yeah.
I would be ostracized from the community.
Correct.
You know, my family would never be able to show their faces in public again. Be like,
Correct.
This guy just scammed the entire street and has gone. Right. So that was almost a way of ensuring trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then how do you do that digitally?
So that's really been interesting. What we've done is really brought it into the 21st century. We call it Bloom Circles. And what it allows you to do is to manage it from your pocket, from your phone, right? So we are under regulatory supervision of the FCA. And what we effectively do is just manage the payments flows. So you can create a private circle and just invite everyone that you know from Masjid, right? And that's who you trust. Mm-hmm. So you invite them in. You have to accept the person into your circle. And that means that you can decide that these people are good for the money. Right.
Okay. So you're allowing people to build their own circles.
Yes, exactly. We have a new kind of product development where you can now join with community members. That's been really interesting as well, because now we have strangers transacting with each other. We have people, we've got Nigerians with Filipinos my best friend, who is a white British woman, is in one. And she's like, this is a really great way for me to save money. So I'm going to use this. Yeah. So she's been using Bloom to save money. And we have just a whole rainbow of cultures, of ethnicities using Bloom. And the sums moving through are really interesting because people have money to put in. We had a guy that asked to put £1,000 in a month, right?
Gosh.
And when I was fundraising early days, VCs were like, but do immigrants have money? And I was like, oh, sweetheart, bless your heart. You have no idea, do you?
Gosh.
Like, I remember I was at the ACAA, the Afghan Central Asian Association. They're based in Hounslow. And I was chatting with a bunch of Afghan women. And I was like, oh, do you do them? And they're like, yeah, we kind of do smaller amounts, like maybe £20 a month into the pool. But they were like, you should go speak to the Somalis. The Somalis are moving money. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And so I went with my friend Sahra, who works at Coots now.
You know Sarah?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. She's one of my best friends. She came to my 30th birthday party in Athens.
Oh,
she
no
flew
way.
out for that.
That's crazy. She was going to be she's hurt her leg, but she was going to be a guest.
Yes.
This week.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. She's fantastic.
I had no idea you guys knew each other. That's so funny.
Yeah. She's set up with her sister Ayan, who owns or owned previously like a shisha bar.
Okay.
We've done like Shah and Sheko, where it's like Sheko is chats. So we used to do like chai and chats as well with like Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi women. And so we did a Shah and Sheko, which is tea and chat and shisha. And listen to the Somali community's experiences of doing Hekbat Ayuto, which is what they call it. And they are moving money. Like, you had Uber drivers who are moving like £800 a month, between groups of 10. So you get £8,000 when it's your turn, right? So it's so interesting to see it come to life by digitizing it and, more importantly, formalizing it.
So what are people using this money for? So you've got these circles, sometimes there's 8,000, 10,000, maybe even higher amounts. What are they using it for, like personal loan?
So it's really interesting. People will use them for, I gave the example, historically, people would use it to get on the housing ladder, to buy a car, or whatever. What we have found so far is people use it for pooling to send larger sums of money home, for example. They'll use it to prepare for things like, one lady was like, oh, it's my son's birthday. And so for the birthday party, it's great to have the committee money now. We had an influx before Eid, makes sense, before holidays. And I expect that we will have an influx before Diwali as well.
Very cool.
For Christmas, back to school, planning for that, got to get the kids uniforms and all that stuff. And then, people are using it for disposable income too. So we had a Filipino nurse who said, yeah, I've rented a caravan and I'm going to Wales and I'm going to use my money in Wales. And we're like, fantastic, great. Like, live the life that you want. And what we've done is just allowed people to do it more conveniently from their pockets. Because what is very interesting about this behavior is while it still persists, it's still typically done in cash. And you have some auntie usually that's like jotting down who has paid in, who's received their payout and all that. They're the ones who knows everyone in the group. They are actually the banker of the group. They're underwriting everyone that joins the group. And so it's been very interesting as we build out our underwriting algorithm, who is good for the money. And perhaps shockingly to people in the formal financial system, we don't have missed payments. People
really?
pay in.
That was my next question. Like, how many defaults have there been?
Yeah, we've moved over £80,000 now.
Wow.
And we've had like late payments. And you should see when people are going to have a late payment, they freak out. Like, they genuinely care and they know the social stigma of paying in late or not at all. And so I've had messages one guy was going to pay in late because he hadn't been paid. And so he messaged us through intercom in the app, emailed our support email, used the WhatsApp number that we have as well, and reached out through Instagram, 4 different channels to say, I'm so sorry. It's only because I've not been paid. I am good for the money. I just need it to be taken tomorrow. If you try it, it's going to fail today. Please apologize profusely to the person who's supposed to receive the money. Their money's going to be delayed. But they care so deeply.
So was this individual, was he in a savings circle with a bunch of people he knew?
He knew like 1 or 2 others, but he didn't know everyone else.
Okay, but even just if you knew one other person, just the sense of shame in that, the thought of, oh no, I'm not doing anything untoward, right? I still am pulling my weight. That's a really good way of bringing in trust.
It is, yeah. Wow. And it's almost like, I've been asked by investors as I'm fundraising, why do you think it works? And I think there's something in that. Well, one, this shame, this collective shame of, I can't be the one that didn't pay in. Not only that, like, you've been KYC'd by us. So we know who you are. We know where you live. We know everything about you. We don't share that with the other circle members, of course, but we know that your name is listed there. And there's also this sense of like mutually assured destruction. If I know that you have to use your committee funds for nursery fees, I'm not going to screw you over because I know that you could screw me over easily as well. And so that might mean I'm not going to be able to buy a plane ticket home, right? So
yeah, and that's so cool. In a world where, I don't know, money is so faceless and everything is so transactional, like we talked about before, it's really like a really nice feel-good way of using money for the intention it was. It's not just money for the sake of it. It's money to actually achieve goals and build communities and help uplift people. We're
currently building out the ability where you can like kind of post after you've used it if you want to share what you used it for. So, we have people that send us in like photos of them on holiday or doing a thing like my business, I put it into my business. I bought this new machine or whatever. And it's like, that's so rewarding.
That's incredible.
But then you feel like everyone in the circle is cheering you on and rooting for you as well, even though they might not know who you are.
Yeah.
And so it's been really interesting. And you see so much about multiplayer fintech. Some of it's worked, some of it hasn't. The closest we've really got to successful multiplayer fintech, I would say, is like either a joint account or I think Public have done it really well, where it's not technically multiplayer, but they've created this community and dialogue around investment.
Probably Go Henry as well, I guess, if you want to call it multiplayer parent-child account.
Sure, yeah. It's like an extension of a joint account. Yeah. Carer cards as well. But to have like 5 or more people in a circle, that's really multiplayer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, points of potential failure.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's something that is really valuable as well, because I know immigrants are creditworthy, which, I'm conscious that we're talking about Muslim money here, but whether it's creditworthy or insurance, we know as well that immigrant communities are paying a premium for credit and for insurance. And so if we can start to bring this data in and prove that, hey, this person's good for the money, they're paying £200 every month for 10 months straight, then we can actually start to underwrite them fairly.
Incredible.
Things like
so is that the logical next step, where someone's payments through Bloom could be help them get a great credit score through Experian?
That is the hope. It's an interesting one because we're not credit, right? And so the CRAs, the credit rating agencies, very much use credit data to build your credit score. Experian is probably I'm like naming names now. Experian is probably the most progressive of the CRAs.
Okay.
And the other two are kind of trying to catch up in the different types of data that is furnished into their algorithms. You may have seen like Experian Boost, and that was using open banking data. Of course, that's all good. You can furnish all you want, but who is going to consume that end score, and which version of the score is most important? But what is so frustrating, I think, about credit scoring, especially in the Western world, is it dictates not just your ability to access credit anymore. Like when you are doing a background check on an employee, you might be checking their credit score.
Yeah.
If you are applying to rent a private flat, they might run a credit check on you as well. When you try and get a phone contract, they run a credit check.
It suddenly becomes, it's not just about buying a house. It's almost like a way of quantifying your value.
No, I mean, and there's that Black Mirror episode of
Yes, yeah, of course.
of that episode where you're constantly like scoring each other.
Yeah.
It becomes very like 5 stars, 5 stars. Yeah. But we are teetering very close to that. And so if you're someone that doesn't engage with credit for any reason, religious or otherwise, can Bloom be something that fills
that void?
Some of that void. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Gosh.
So it's interesting. We've also been approached by banks. Spoke to a really great bank in Laos.
Okay.
Spoke to a bank in Jordan, and they have asked us about like, oh, can we license Bloom? Because actually this behavior does exist in the native country, right?
Absolutely.
And so can we license that? So it's a really exciting trip.
It's so interesting because like in terms of the alternative credit scoring space, we've been talking with banks in Malaysia and Pakistan. With Malaysia, the idea of saving circles is actually illegal in Malaysia. So it's not being allowed. In Pakistan, they've got a different problem where there is no credit rating agency in Pakistan. So it's banks all have to do their own individual credit scores. It's very expensive. So we've been thinking about using, we are actively doing this in Pakistan now and looking at it with a bank in Malaysia, but using people's spending behavior and their income to create some semblance of a credit score automatically instead of people having to go in and do it manually, which means that in Pakistan, very few people actually have bank accounts. Only about 20% of people as of last year have a bank account. And that's not because people aren't financially literate. People are actively avoiding bank accounts because they don't want to pay tax. So that's something that is not going to go away anytime soon. But of the 50 million, the 20% who do have bank accounts, only about 2%, so 4 million people, are able to access credit very easily. And that's because of how manual it is to actually rate someone and see whether they're credit worthy or not. So it's really only the high net worth people or the ultra high net worth who are able to access it. So what we're looking at is, can we use the banking data, the PFM, personal financial management stuff, to create some kind of an alternate score? Yeah. So it's really interesting how different countries are tackling this and looking at it.
And I'm surprised that it's illegal in Malaysia. I know in Indonesia it's called arisan, and it might be...
In Malaysia, I think it's called kutu.
Maybe
kutu. My Malaysian listeners are probably saying it's not that. I'm butchering it.
I'll have to ask because I have several Malaysian friends. I know that the behavior exists, definitely.
Yes.
I just don't know the word for it in Malay.
I believe so. So this is what my team has told me, that it used to happen. There were quite a few high-profile scams that took place. So the crackdown by the regulator was, let's just stop it.
This is so interesting, isn't it? Because the same thing happened in Ghana, where they call it susu.
Okay.
And there was this big scandal with this guy, this celebrity guy, Nam One. and he basically scammed a bunch of people and became a Ponzi scheme, basically.
Wow.
And so actually, because of that is not that long ago. This is recent history. Immigrants from Ghana here in the UK are very wary of it.
Really?
And so it's so interesting how one thing can just destroy the trust completely. And we get comments all the time on our Instagram post or whatever, and people are like, this is a scam. Like, but it just goes to show that there's a very fine line, because people have been burned before as well. But there is value in it if we can start to color in this picture of the fact that people are creditworthy, that we should not be charging them insane premiums on their insurance, right? Because they can pay. They are good for the money, and other financial products down the line.
Nina, this has been an incredible conversation. There's so much more I wanted to ask.
I know.
I appreciate we're actually over time.
Oh my gosh.
Are you in trouble?
No, we're going to be fine.
We're going to be fine?
Yeah, we'll be fine.
Okay, cool. So the last thing I just wanted to ask you
Yes.
was, at the time of recording, there's been a lot of societal unrest around immigrants and immigration, and beyond that, integration by immigrant communities. Has that affected what are people on the ground saying? What are your customers saying around this? Because it's weird to think that not 2 weeks ago, I was telling my wife and my mum and other people, don't leave the house because there are crazy people outside who might just attack you for being a brown person.
No, like I had a guy grab my arm and say, go back to where you came
Really?
from. Yeah. And I was like, I'm from California, man. What? Okay, fine, I guess, if you want me to. I mean, racism, unfortunately, is baked into British society. I hate to say it, systemically, given the history of imperialism of where we live. It's been a really strange, weird few weeks. I remember 2 weeks ago, I was on the phone the whole morning. I just cleared my calendar and was calling. We have a lot of organizations that work with immigrants or migrants or refugees, and calling individuals up and just saying like, hey, there's these planned riots or protests near you. Please do not engage with it. Please stay home. Like, and I know people had very differing views about whether to go and meet them or not and counter protest, whatever. I was very heartened to see a lot of white Britons rise to the occasion and counter protest. That was incredible.
What happened in Walthamstow was amazing.
Beautiful. And I think that is more indicative of where we are as British society. But it really broke my heart calling up one of the founders of this Filipino nursing community. And I was worried sick because some of the rioters were throwing literal rocks at Filipino nurses that were going into the hospital in Sunderland to cover an emergency shift. Like, you're throwing rocks at nurses.
That's insane.
Are you, what? And I think it's so frustrating to have to constantly justify our existence. And a friend of mine who's British Nigerian, she was kind of saying, we need to get rid of this rhetoric that, we're so philanthropic, we give back so much to our community, we've built a community center, whatever. No. We deserve respect for simply existing, for living. But the truth of the matter is, of course, that we know that immigrants contribute so much to this country, to Europe. We are the ones driving your buses. We're the ones cleaning your offices. We're the ones that are tending to you in A&E. I mean, I was in A&E recently, right? And every single doctor and nurse and health practitioner from like first intake to phlebotomy and onwards was an immigrant, right? So
the NHS does run on melanin.
It really does. So at this point, it's what frustrates me most is how anyone, as I'm raising the seed round, can see this behavior and the political rhetoric across Europe and then say to my face, we don't see the need for something like Bloom. So you don't see the need for a community-led business that understands the migrant experience. You don't see the value in that. Interesting. Okay. That's frustrating, but I think, there's hope. And also, like, it sounds so cynical of me. It just illustrates that Bloom needs to exist. This unrest just shows us if a guy can put on a balaclava and go and riot in the streets and then disappear overnight when there's counter protesters, who's to say that he's not going to be your bank teller at your local
that's
branch,
such a good
right?
point.
Isn't that I think that haunts me, is we don't know who these people were. It was like the January 6th insurrection in the States. People were tracking down where these people worked, but for us, it's like we've not really gone to that length. And so where have they disappeared to? Are they in positions of power? Can they be deciding policies that actually hurt us? Can they be working at banks and declining loans or increasing your insurance policy because of where you live? Maybe, maybe not.
Gosh,
but highly likely.
That's a terrifying thought.
Not to scare anyone, but this is just to say it proves my point that Bloom needs to exist.
Absolutely. Gosh, and that's an amazing point to leave it. So Nina, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
It's going to be an incredible episode. So inshallah, we'll see you next time.
Inshallah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.